Hello, and welcome to Timing is Everything, a program of Care Dimensions. My name is Mary Crowe, Director of Professional and Community Education at Care Dimensions. Today, we have the good fortune of having Erin Uzarski with us, who is a bereavement counselor at the Bertillon Center for Grief and Healing. Thanks for coming, Erin.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is such an important show. So here we are. We're running up to the holidays. Do you believe this?
I know, it's coming.
I'm a little shocked. It just feels like the summer was still here, and here we are. So the holidays are right down the road, and this is an important show. We like to do this every year, and it's around coping with the holidays after a loss. This is a unique time for people.
It is.
Isn't it? So before we get into this topic, so tell us a little bit about yourself, Erin.
So I'm a mental health counselor, and I've been with Care Dimensions for just under 4 years now in their grief department with the Bertillon Center.
Great, great. So, I'm sure, again, you see a lot going on, right? Right around now. The holidays are a challenging time to start with.
They are.
So talk about that. Talk about why the holidays are such a challenge in general, but then I also want to get into the specifics about why they become really kind of an extra type of challenge for people who are coping after a loss.
Sure. I think in general the holidays we're expected to perform, we're expected to be at our best, and we're expected to be happy no matter what's going on in our lives. And so I think it puts a lot of pressure on ourselves to meet those expectations and be who we think we should be and kind of not who we are in that moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, we get these messages all around us, right? And it's not just, I don't think it's just our internal dialogue, but we're being told by the media that we're supposed to be celebrating and joyous all the time. And that's what the holidays are all about, but it's something very different for a lot of people.
Right.
So what are some of the challenges? What do you see as some of the unique challenges that people face after they've had a loss?
I think one of the main challenges is just figuring out, especially if you're in that first year, figuring out what are the holidays going to look like. Trying to be realistic that they're going to be different, especially if your loved one was present in those situations. Is it, do you leave their place empty at the dinner table? What does it feel like not buying presents for them the first time? And that elephant of the room of, do you bring them up with family members, or do you ignore them and just all think about it?
Absolutely. Yeah, like you say, those firsts, right? Getting through that. And certainly the years to follow that can be even more of a challenge, but what it sounds like you're talking about is that, you're actually kind of developing a new normal in life, because life, when you've had the loss or the death of somebody that you love, life is never the same.
Right.
So you're really having to develop that new normal. So it's hard, that first round of what you do. Do you find that people, and this is what I have seen, is that people, they try to make plans. Okay, so this is what we have to do now. So what do you, and we'll talk about practical suggestions in a while, but, I think that's another added pressure of now we think we have to have all the answers for all the holidays to come.
Right. And I think it's important to realize that the first holiday is important because it's the first. It's the learning curve of trying to figure out what are our expectations for this holiday. And the next holidays to come are different in their own ways, and they bring their own situations where that new normal has kind of set in now, and then it's, what do I want this normal to look like long term? And so when you're going through the holidays, to just remember that just because you do something one year doesn't mean you have to keep doing that, and it's okay to just play and find with what's comfortable.
Sure, absolutely. And you don't know that,
right,
when you're in that first year. It's all a blur.
Right.
Right. I think that's the hard part for people too, is that it's like you talked about, those expectations. And we do this with grief, right? This is how I should be feeling.
Right.
So there's all that of what we think it's supposed to look like, and then we get scared by what we really feel.
Right, right.
So what other types of struggles do you see that people go through in this time? You had talked about the piece of, just trying to sort it out, or just, and all of that. And then you have multiple family members.
Right.
So not everybody does this the same way.
Right. And a big struggle is when you're grieving in a family, you have to be realistic that chances are you're all going to be grieving differently.
Yeah.
And it's hard and it's awkward to communicate your grief to family members, but it's also important to know where you're at with your grief, whatever that may be, and to communicate with them of where they're at so you can talk about the holidays and figure out what can we do to make this okay for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the added complication around the holidays for kids.
Right.
Right? Because you bring kids into the picture, and that throws a whole nother layer to this, doesn't it?
Right.
Because, kids have a different expectation around the holiday time, too.
Absolutely.
What do you say to families in that situation?
I say to them to be honest as they feel comfortable with their children, and to not be afraid to show the children that everyone's having a little bit of a tricky time with this.
Sure. Yeah.
To not put up those expectations where you have to be okay all the time, because it's okay not to be.
Sure.
And it's okay to be sad, even though, like you said, kind of the media, even the music when you go into a store is we should be happy.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, so many expectations. So other things that you have found in terms of, again, some of the struggles that you see people face as we approach, or actually even on the holidays themselves.
One of the big ones too, if you're a gift giver, is going into the stores.
Yeah.
Like I said, seeing those decorations. Maybe you're in a stage with your grief where you don't want to shop. You don't want to feel that joy. You don't even want to think about buying people gifts. And I think a lot of people put pressure on themselves to be who they were before, before their loss, and to know that it's absolutely okay to be different now.
Yep.
And if you're feeling like you don't want to go out and you don't want to do all that shopping, it's okay to go a little lighter, or it's okay to, take the gift card route, something like that, where maybe it feels a little bit less painful, but it's still going to hurt.
Sure. I think, one of the things that comes to mind when you were talking is grief is exhausting. I think that, people are under the misconception that grief is a passive process.
Right.
When in actuality, it's a lot of hard work, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So I see that, sometimes this is part of the struggle too around the holidays, is that, the holidays demand a lot of attention and energy from us, energy that we don't have because we're grieving.
Right.
And I just wanted you to talk a little bit more about that. This is exhausting for people. So how can they even motivate themselves to do what's necessary? You're talking about shopping, you talked about preparing and all this other stuff. I'm exhausted just thinking about it. And nevertheless, as you have a heavy heart.
Right. And it's important to be kind to yourself and to know that you can stop. You can take a moment to stop the shopping, stop the preparing, and to just kind of check in with yourself and say, am I okay right now? Am I able to perform these tasks? And to be honest with yourself and ask, do I need help with this?
Sure.
Is a big one, because absolutely the energy levels it's hard to keep up with the holidays in general.
Yeah, grieving people are really in survival mode, aren't they?
Right.
It's really day to day that you feel like that's what you're trying to get through.
Right.
So the thoughts of so here we are, we're in early November, and we're thinking about even 2 or 3 weeks from now. It's a lot of energy for people to even think that far ahead of what I'm going to be able to do then, when how am I going to get through today? Right. So it's it's just like I said, it's just so tricky with that. I also wanted to bring up with you, just again based on what you had mentioned, it's just the contrast of feelings that people experience. So again, you got the joy and you got the sadness that people what people are feeling in terms of the grieving, but the demands and the expectations around the joy. How can people navigate? Because again, even if they feel joyous or they want to laugh, sometimes that's a struggle for grieving people.
Absolutely. Especially when you're having a good time and maybe you feel like you shouldn't be because your loved one isn't here to enjoy it with you. And like you said, you have joy on one hand and you have sadness on the other. And I think a lot of people feel like they have to pick, am I happy or am I sad? But to know that you can be joyous and be sad, that they're not mutually exclusive. Yeah,
there's a wonderful little saying that says that joy and pain can live in the same home, that neither is exclusive of one another,
exactly.
and neither negates the other. And I really believe in that, and I think it's just such a hard part for people who are grieving, almost sometimes feeling, do you see that, like there's the feeling of like a disloyalty to the person who's died?
Absolutely. A disloyalty or a guilt and those feelings of how can I be happy when they're not here to enjoy this? Do I have the right to be happy when they're not here? And I think it's tricky to find a way, if you're not used to marrying those two emotions, to find a way where it feels comfortable.
Sure.
You know, and to ask yourself when you're feeling guilty about a certain feeling or being happy about a certain feeling, to know that just because you're feeling joy doesn't mean you forgot about your person.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you miss them any less.
That's
it just
right.
means that's one star in the sky.
Yes.
And that sadness is still there.
Right.
And sometimes even just knowing that even when we're happy and laughing that sadness is there, it's comforting because that's our tie.
Sure. And asking yourself too, of course, if the tables were reversed, what would the person, you know, what would you want for that person in terms of having those experiences of joyfulness through the sadness?
Right.
You know, so as human beings, we just put so much pressure on ourselves, and the guilt is just we're so hardwired for it, aren't we?
Absolutely.
So what are the things in terms of like these challenges that are specific around the holidays? Can you suggest to the audience and some of the things that people, because I think it's really helpful for the things that you're saying, to help people feel, and I don't use the word normal a lot, but to help people feel like this is not unusual to have these feelings, because don't you feel like people who are grieving feel that way sometimes? Like there's something wrong with me. There's I'm doing something wrong.
Absolutely, and in grief, nothing you do is wrong, and I think one of the big things that people go through is if your loved one was the person who was kind of the ringleader of the holidays. We feel that we have to do what they did, whether we liked it or not. And we have this expectation to make it the way that they made it, and to know that we can try, but also to know that even if we do everything exactly the same, we're not going to feel it's the same.
Sure.
And to have some realistic expectations that things are going to be different, and that's also okay.
Sure. So reestablishing different traditions and without having to feel like, again, that you're kind of not paying attention or honoring that person who's died.
Right.
It's a tricky one, isn't it?
It is.
You know, especially like you say early on too. It gets really complicated for people.
Right, and I think on the flip side to that, we hear a lot about the foods at the holidays, and we'll just kind of use the green bean casserole as an example of a lot of people don't like it, but maybe your loved one, that was their favorite dish, and so they always made sure it was there, but nobody else ate it. You know, how would it feel to look at the table and not to see that casserole? And a lot of times people make that food knowing it's not going to be eaten, but it's comforting to see it there, and it's a way to incorporate their loved one.
Yeah, I think, you know, that's an important part to understand, right, about grief is that, you know, kind of forming a new relationship with the deceased. Right? That they're always they might not be here physically on this earth, but they're still always a part of our lives. So I think that's the struggle for people of how and that's what they're working on, right, in part of that grief process. Is how to reincorporate that. Other things or challenges, you know, you were talking about the food thing. So, you know, what if the person who died was the one who cut the turkey? What if they're the one, right? And so you talked about that ringleader of the holidays, but, you know, even things like that, we think of it, though, that's just small and minor, but it's really not, is it?
No, it's not. And it's a role that they played. No matter how big or small their role is, it was theirs. And I think it's important to, if you're spending the holidays with family and people you feel comfortable communicating with, is to maybe ask them, you know, who wants to take that role this year? If people feel like we need to do it differently, you know, maybe your tradition was carving the turkey at the table. Maybe this year we carve it in the kitchen. To maybe change it up just enough where it feels more comfortable.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, it's you know, I think that's the awkwardness about everybody kind of tiptoes around one another too, right? Because everybody, you know, nobody, and when people start, you also talked about talking about the loved one. Do you find that, you know, people kind of avoid, they don't want to upset each other?
And it's funny because people will always say, well, I didn't want to mention them, I didn't want to make you sad. And if you've ever grieved anyone, you know that you haven't forgotten.
Right.
And so it's sometimes important, and even if you have the opportunity before kind of the sit-down holiday, to talk about how much do we want to incorporate them.
Yeah.
You know, do we want to go around the table and talk about them, maybe say a story about them, or do we want to just quietly kind of have a moment to remember them, or
Sure.
none of that?
Right. Yeah.
You know, kind of one of the big things we also hear is, if you celebrate Christmas, is do we hang the stocking?
Right. Yeah.
If we do hang it, how are we going to feel when it's empty?
Sure.
Do we put something in it? And kind of one of those things of how you can navigate that is sometimes families will write on a piece of paper memories they had with their loved one. And so when everyone's opening their stockings, everyone can pull out a memory and read it out loud, and you can
isn't
learn
that
new
nice?
stories about the
Yeah.
person.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, I always see with families too that just this challenge around, some people get stuck into a certain routine of wanting to do it one way, other people are doing it another way. So it's trying to come to terms with, because people can get upset when everybody's not on the same page and wanting to do
Right.
things. So that's a challenge when you're trying to navigate that with the whole family.
Absolutely.
And people are in different places with their grief, as you mentioned.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Other things that you can think of, or again, I want to talk about some practical suggestions too, which we're kind of bringing in here. But there are ways, right, that people can navigate through this process.
Right.
What are some of the ones that stand out for you? And do you have even kind of little scenarios that you have had over the years with people that you think would be
Sure.
helpful?
One of probably the biggest question I get is, am I allowed to not participate in the holidays this year?
Yeah.
And the answer to that is absolutely. Again, back to that idea of, just because you do something this holiday doesn't mean that has to be your new tradition.
Right.
That you can, I've worked with plenty of people that take a vacation to somewhere warm and they kind of completely ignore their holiday.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, they come back in January and just kind of take it from there. And then, maybe the next year they pick up their traditions again, or something a little bit different.
Sure.
And to know, again, those expectations that we have on ourselves, I think it's so important to just be kind to ourselves and to know that we might not feel the same that we have about the holidays, and that's okay. It doesn't mean it's permanent.
Right.
And that
right.
we can find ways to do that.
Sure. I think people do feel like it is, right? So that they've totally lost their spark or their excitement. If the holidays were a time when, that they found that joy and all, that they feel like they've lost it forever.
Right.
But not so, right?
Right.
It's hard to feel that way when you're grieving.
Right.
But again, there will be joy again down the road. It's going to be different, like you say, but
Right.
it's still there.
Right.
What are some other practical suggestions that you can give people around this time too?
To think about the table, where you eat, and if your person had a specific seat, to think about what you want to do with that. And I think thinking about all these things ahead of time can sometimes relieve some of that anxiety of that buildup of, I have no idea what the day is going to look like. And so to think about, do we want to leave their seat empty?
Yep.
Do we want to put something in their seat that maybe they loved? Maybe it was a sweater they loved, or stuffed animal, something that kind of symbolizes them.
Sure.
Or do you want to switch up the seating arrangements so there's no empty seat?
Yep.
To think about what's going to be the least painful, but to also know that it's probably going to be a little tricky no matter what you do, and to know that that's okay.
Yeah. So plan ahead for the hard times.
Absolutely.
Right? So knowing, and I think because we kind of go along, and you see this with grieving people, that they're thinking, okay, I'm doing all right, I'm doing all right, and then boom.
Right.
Right? So and then they think, oh, I'm not doing well. It's not that they're not doing well, it's that it's the roller coaster ride of grief.
Right.
So it's I like that, to plan ahead for the hard time, knowing that this is, so that it doesn't creep up on you and scare you like, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with me again.
Right.
That this is a natural part of the process.
Right. And to know that you can veer from your plans.
Yeah.
If you get to that day and maybe you've planned to switch up the seating arrangement, but you get to that day and that just doesn't feel right to you, it's okay to switch it up too.
It's nice when families can talk openly about this stuff, and that, again, we understand everybody's in a different place, but what do people need? I was talking with a group, and there was a gentleman in the group who had lost a wife, and young. They were in their late 50s, and so there's 3 grown daughters, and they were talking about this. This was the first upcoming holiday for them. They wanted to get, the husband wanted to get together with all the kids, and the kids who are in healthcare actually were picking up extra shifts.
Okay.
And it was hard for them, you know, and then for him, because he was disappointed, thinking, why aren't we pulling together? This was how they needed to get through the holiday.
Right.
So in that situation, you know, what would you suggest to that sort? Because again, I was talking to him about, is it okay to everybody doing what they have to just to navigate through the day? If they had another time, they could all come together.
Right, absolutely. To find another time that maybe has less pressure on it.
Yeah.
I've had families that will change the day of the holiday.
Yeah.
You know, maybe they'll have their Thanksgiving dinner between kind of that time of Christmas and New Year's, something like that, where maybe coming together on that day is just a little too raw.
Yes.
But moving it slightly, so for that example, the father could get his needs of having the family together for that holiday setting, but the daughters could meet their needs of, I can't be there that day.
Yeah. And like we said, it's the trickiness of everybody has their own way
Right.
of coping and dealing and adjusting to the loss and to cope with the grief. So
Right.
what other things, you know, in terms of, because there's ways of memorializing, of giving back, of there's so many things people can do. Can you talk more about some of those?
Sure. I had worked with somebody who their loved one had a tradition of going to a local toy store and buying a bunch of gifts for kids in shelters in various situations of need. And so what they ended up doing was they went and got the toys in honor of their loved one and donated them with their name.
Wow, very nice.
Absolutely, and a great way to kind of memorialize that and keep that tradition going.
Yeah.
And they also made sure that when these people got the gifts, it wasn't about gaining recognition for giving them, but they wanted them to know, you know, who these were in memory of.
Sure.
And I think that's important.
Yep.
And you know, sometimes, and kind of back to that gift-giving scenario of it's hard not shopping for them, sometimes family members can get together and maybe buy a present for the family that person is to give to them.
Wow, yeah, very nice.
Or something, maybe you buy something that they would like and put it in the home or donate it to somewhere in their name, something like that.
That's nice. You know, even as a group sometimes, even to maybe everybody pulls together and goes and gives out meals
Absolutely.
to people that are in need or doing things like that. There's so many different things, boy, you can really pull together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I always talk to people about this is a time maybe you can like do for others, and which is hard to really think about as a grieving person, isn't it? But boy, that can also help with healing, can't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, now, so in terms of, talk about support, because again, you're at the Verdalon Center for Grief and Healing. Tell the audience what's available out there for people around this time of year and in general with grieving.
Sure. Well, with Care Dimensions, we do the tree lighting ceremonies, and we have a few of them kind of throughout our service area. But the one we're doing in Danvers has a workshop, Coping with the Holidays, which will be directly after the tree lighting, and it'll be in a building next door if anyone's interested in that.
Nice.
We do ask that they just call ahead and let us know, but if you get there and you want to walk in, that's fine.
Great.
We also have support groups. We have a drop-in group that runs 2 Tuesdays a month that people can come into. And we also have a fall and spring service of remembrance as well that's open not just to Care Dimensions families, but also families in the community.
Oh, that's wonderful. So let's talk about how they should call the Verdalon Center, right?
Yes, yeah.
So let's get that slide up now too, just so that we can. Here we go. There's they can contact the Verdalon Center for Grief and Healing.
Yes.
And ask about the groups that are available and other workshops or events that are coming up,
yes,
right?
and if you're looking for something holiday specific, to just let us know that, and then we can get you to the right places.
Excellent. Well, I'll tell you, this has gone by very fast. I've enjoyed talking with you because you're giving out some really important information, Erin, and I can't thank you enough. So, but before we wrap up, we just have another minute, but if you have one last pearl, like to share with the audience about just how to get through this time of year, but like I said, particularly after having a loss, what would you say to them?
I would say, well, first to just be kind to yourself,
Yeah.
and secondly to have a plan, but to have that escape route.
Yes.
You know, if you're going somewhere for the holidays and maybe you know you're not going to be able to leave, is there a room if you need a moment by yourself that you can go into and identify that space ahead of time?
Yeah.
Or if you're going somewhere, you know, do you want to take your own car? So that way, if you feel like you need to leave, you can.
That's a really good suggestion.
Absolutely.
Because people do feel trapped, right?
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
they might be less apt to go, thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to be stuck there for hours.
Right,
Yeah.
right. They might want to not go at all, or if they're going with family members, they may be less likely to speak up for their needs and say, you know, I think I really need to leave if other people are dependent on leaving with them. Maybe
Yes.
you all took one car.
Yeah.
So to always have kind of a plan A and a plan B.
Great
And
idea.
sometimes just having that escape route can relieve some of that anxiety of, I'm going to have to show up and I'm going to have to be happy.
Yes, that's a great idea. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. We
Absolutely.
really appreciate it. And I want to thank our audience for tuning in to Timing is Everything. I'm Mary Crowe, and we'll look forward to having you tune into our next show.
Care Dimensions, formerly Hospice of the North Shore in Greater Boston, is different in that we do more than just hospice.
It's just incredible, the services they provide when people need it the most.
So being able to offer more individualized care helps people feel more cared for.
Because it's about the patient's quality of life.
I don't think there's any place else in the Boston area like Care Dimensions.
At Care Dimensions, we'll take care of your family like you're a part of ours. Visit us at caredimensions.org.